Welcome everyone to the Southeast Asian Association of Graduate Employers first ever global webinar. We're very excited to be able to start offering our members, our partners and our friends the opportunity to join content in a more digital manner and in a more easily accessible manner, which is really exciting. Today's topic is building resilience in the job search and early career, and we've got some very exciting speakers to take us through that topic today. But first of all, I'll just give you the standard overview of who we are at SEAAGE and what we do. So we're a not-for-profit organisation based here in Singapore. We are an independent organisation run by graduate employers for graduate employers and vendors in Southeast Asia across the broad range of industries that we are lucky to host in this region. We are all volunteers. We are just passionate early talent professionals who want to come together to provide a range of services, content and information to the industry. And our objective is to help organisations better understand how to recruit and retain early in career talent, both globally and locally. Enough about us at SEAAGE. I will now introduce our wonderful host and expert for the day. So today we have myself from SEAAGE hosting the webinar. Our moderator is Neil Cortis, and Neil is coming to us today from the UK, where it's just after 4 a.m. in the morning. So thank you very much for joining us, Neil. Neil is the Managing Director of Sensible Media, which is an e-learning organisation focused on careers. And Neil and his team work with business schools globally to deliver this type of digital facility. Colette Vogel is our amazing expert, and we're very excited to have Colette with us today, coming from the US. Colette is Senior Director of Employer and MBA Engagement from the Foster School of Business MBA Career Management. I'm just going to give a bit of an overview of Colette and her background, and Colette will also add a little bit to that when I hand over to both her and Neil. So Colette completed her doctorate at the Teachers College at Columbia University in Adult Learning and Leadership. Her research interests include navigating ambiguity and building resilience in organisations. She trained with some of the most prestigious names in positive psychology, including Martin Seligman of Learned Optimism and Authentic Happiness, and obtained a mentor, coach and design thinking certification to focus on learning and coaching developing leaders. Colette served as a part-time faculty member at Seattle University and the University of Washington's Foster School of Business, and built organisational management capability working and consulting with companies including Starbucks, Microsoft, and as a vice president at Citigroup, where she led global talent development programs. In Colette's current role with the career management team at Foster School of Business, the MBA program has ascended the rankings to become a top 20 business school and #1 in employment results, according to Business Week, US News and World Report, and the Financial Times over the past 3 years running. She derives results through innovative and employer engagement and coaching programs. As a member of the UW Resilience Lab, a cross-campus collaboration intended to build resilience in the UW community, she developed coaching models for building resilience and managing uncertainty. She directs the UW Foster MBA Mentor Program intended to build leadership, identity and promote growth mindset culture. A bit more personally, she's married with 3 daughters who are aged 15, 24 and 28, and she lives in Bainbridge Island and commutes to Seattle by ferry. She's happy anytime in on the water and is a serial adventure traveller, and once had lions purring under her tent in Botswana all night, which sounds like an amazing experience. She lived to tell about it and would do it all over again. As a result, I'm going to hand over to Neil and Colette to take us through our topic today of building resilience in the job search and early career. Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Colette, let's get into this subject of building career resilience.
So I'm excited to be here tonight, Neil, and to talk about resilience. I have a leadership development background and I know from the employer side, when I was hiring high potential talent, that we looked for tenacity, We looked for resilience. We looked for problem solvers in very challenging situations. And so I know employers want resiliency in their high potential talent. At the same time, when I shifted to higher education and began working with MBAs, I was very surprised at how much rejection was going on, and the rejection was happening everywhere. Every MBA has been rejected from a job at one point, and what was surprising to me was to see who bounced back and who did not. And keep in mind, we've got some of the best placement records in the country. Having said that, there is rejection. And I also know that recruiters are dealing a lot with rejection. They interview 30 people, they hire 2. That means 28 rejections. So who bounces back, who does not, and how can we build a resilient culture and a resilient early career talent leadership pipeline?
Can I ask quickly, just because you mentioned
Yes.
it, Colette, someone said in the pre-submitted questions, is there a way to test for resilience in hiring? If you know that you need resilient people, is there some way you can identify them as you're screening them?
Yes, I think that's a really good question. You can ask questions around, tell me about a time. Tell me about a time you dealt with a challenging situation. And it's not just the situation, their response, but it's how they respond. And you're probing around, what was going on in your mind at that time? What were you thinking? What was the next step? Did you have a contingency plan? Those kinds of questions can tease out resiliency. Oftentimes you're hiring high potentials to move into turnaround situations where the ship is sinking and you're asking them to turn it around, or you're asking them to save a product launch that didn't go well, or to work with the revenue streams that are plummeting and to turn that around. So we need resilient high potential talent, and that's why MBAs are hired, because of their problem solvers, and they do provide and they do work in challenging situations well. That's what we're looking for.
Excellent.
So if moving on, what we want to do today, or why this workshop, well, a couple reasons. We want to know how we can build resilience with our early career talent, or what I like to call developing leaders. We also want to think about how we can support our MBAs as they look for jobs, and also how we can support our employers, because they want resilient employees, and our employers want to preserve their brand with their candidates. And certainly in this day of social media, where we have Glassdoor and anything can be written about the experience, this is top of mind for our recruiters as well.
Do you, just on the subject of millennials, someone asked about this, do you think there is this stereotype of the millennial generation as, I don't know, less resilient? Do you buy that, I wonder, Colette?
To some extent, not all, certainly not all. I don't think you have to experience a tragedy to become resilient. And I've had millennials ask me, but I've never, had a tragedy. I'm intact. I had a happy childhood and so on. What we do need to do is inculcate the sense of life isn't easy. It can be difficult. In fact, you can expect it to be difficult. And we would like you to have that kind of mindset shift. And as you think about your career as well, you're being hired to solve problems that are difficult. And so we're asking our students to think of their time at MBA school, but also in business school, but also their time in their career as problem solvers and there to solve difficult problems.
Yes.
So we've got a couple things we're going to be doing today. Our objective is to talk about this mindset shift that we're looking for, and we'll also be when a problem is encountered. We're going to be talking about how we can help our students cope and bounce back more quickly by walking through a model that I developed through my dissertation. And then I'd love to share collective strategies for building resilience in the workplace, because we have collective wisdom with everyone online, here on the webinar, and I'd love to hear their ideas and what's worked for them and what advice they have as well.
Sounds great.
Okay, good. I'll also be pulling on some positive psychology literature and talking about how we work with our students. It includes some of the self-compassion literature from Kristen Neff, who is at UT Austin, and she's a professor there. She's talked a lot about self-compassion and the idea that you can expect mistakes. No one's perfect. How do you work through that when you've made a mistake? I'll also be pulling on some of the literature from on growth mindset from Carol Dweck. She's a professor at Stanford. And this thinking is so popular now that the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, has decided that he would like a growth mindset culture. And that is around thinking that this might be a difficult challenge, but what can I learn from it? I wasn't perfect, versus a fixed mindset, I know it all and let's see what you can do kind of thing. So what can we do in terms of learning together? We'll also be looking at resilience and some of the ways to build resilience that we've seen in the literature as well. So I think we'll be drawing on all of those concepts to help support our developing leaders.
I see you've got grit on there, Colette. Someone asked a question about habits. Is this stuff about habits, about kind of good habits, or is that how do you train yourself to be better at all this stuff?
Oh, that's a great question. I think we'll be walking through some of this. It's habits, but also how to talk to yourself in a compassionate and kind way, knowing that there will be challenges, there will be mistakes, there will be difficulties, and how do you step back, reflect, and say, well, I didn't get it right yet. And that's what grit is about, knowing that you didn't get it right yet, but you're going to be trying it again and being tenacious about capturing and about mastering what you're trying to master.
Great.
Okay. So part of my thinking on this came from a discussion that I had with a student, and it was in February, and February in Seattle was very dark. It was raining. It was 5 p.m., and a student came to my door and he said, and I said, oh, John, I haven't seen you in ages. And he actually had circles under his eyes. He had 5 days of stubble, and he said, I haven't left my apartment in a week. I was just devastated. I applied to 10 of these jobs and I didn't get an interview. I finally got 3 interviews and I didn't get put forward to the second round. Finally, I got 1 and I thought I was going to get that and I didn't get it. And I just don't know where to begin. And this led me to think, well, at least he took action. At least he came to our office and talked about it. What about all of the MBAs I don't know about who've maybe withdrawn? And this is something we can't have in career management, because we need them to get their head back in the game and continue looking. And so from that experience, I thought about, well, how can we get them more fully functioning and back in the game? Because this is what employers are looking for as well. And I know that from being on the other side. And he wouldn't have a chance of getting hired in the place that he was at. And so this led me to look at model for thinking about resilience with our MBAs that I think applies to our early career talent as well. So what we looked at was first talking about a mindset shift for our MBAs, to expect obstacles, to expect challenges. Sometimes when MBAs are accepted into the graduate school, there's a sense of, gee, I'm all set. I'm all set. Now, it's smooth sailing from here, all green lights. And I'm sure that some leaders of talent development also see that they might hire the MBA and they think, I'm all set, now my career is set. It's only beginning, and there's just, obstacles and challenges and setbacks around every corner. So what we're trying to do is teach our MBAs life skills that they can take into the workplace. And this is what our talent development people on the other side would also probably want to be thinking about as well. These are life skills, and how can we help our early career talent bounce back? And this also requires a mindset shift in terms of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. And of course, some already have a growth mindset. It's, I'm not there yet, but I'm going to keep trying. Versus a fixed mindset would tell you, I don't know what else to do. I guess I'm not good at this, and to label themselves as, failures, or as someone who can't make progress in this area. And maybe they'll do something drastic, like switch industries or switch careers based on one rejection from one company, without recognizing, oh, maybe I'm just not a fit for this particular company, or maybe I didn't understand the job specs quite the right way. So we're looking at a mindset shift, basically, to expect obstacles and challenges and to adopt a growth mindset. And then we're also looking at a roadmap for resilience, and that is a model for coping through the setback once that happens. And I'll walk through how that happens, on the next slide. But we're building a support network for the students along the way, and this can be done in corporations as well: coaches, peers, mentors, and then a concept of understanding and having enough self-awareness of their strengths so that they can leverage those when they encounter adversity.
So when people job hunt, we understand that you have to apply to lots of jobs, you have to explore lots of opportunities. But when you're giving someone feedback, if they're not doing well enough, you kind of don't want them to be terribly resilient, because you want them to pay attention to you want sometimes to shock people into action. I don't know. What I'm asking is, when is this stuff an important signal that actually you do need to change direction? When should you perhaps not ignore this negative occurrence?
That's fair. That's a fair comment. It's a disorientation that they encounter. It's a disorienting, what we like to call dilemma, or disorienting moment, when they think, gee, I thought it was, I nailed that interview, I crushed it, or I thought I was definitely a direct hit for this role, and I didn't get it. That's disorienting. So at that point, we sit with the student, or you could sit with the manager, and unpack it. What can we learn from this? And that's only the beginning.
Okay, great.
So I mentioned we're going, basically we were looking at expecting a setback versus having the sense of we're all set, and adopting a growth versus a fixed mindset. And so circling back, this is to answer your question about millennials. Some millennials have a sense that it's smooth sailing. They've been successful all their lives, and they've never had a setback in a big way. They wouldn't be at B school if they hadn't been successful. So now they're coming to reckon with the fact that everyone is successful, and the talent they're competing with is not just within the business school, in our case at Foster, but across, frankly, the world. And so all for global companies, they're looking at MBA talent across the globe. So they need to think about the fact that it's going to be harder than they anticipated.
Do you think the world, I know you've been involved in downsizing, Colette, which is hard for everyone. Is the world harder?
Yeah.
Is the reason we're talking about resilience because the world of work, I don't know, in some countries has just become harder and less certain and more kind of prone to accidents?
To be honest, yeah, I mean, I suppose it's, I think so. The hierarchies are flatter, so we've got more people reporting to one individual. So it requires the new hire to have receive less direction, and to be more self-directed and take more initiative in terms of learning the ropes. And there are fewer supports around that, and we also have more restructuring and more downsizing. So if a student, and this happens sometimes, particularly some from different cultures, their experience is that if I work hard and I get really good grades, then I will succeed. And if I work really hard in my job, and I will succeed. But in fact, there's a lot that goes into getting a job, and that includes networking. It involves being somewhat political, although it has a pejorative connotation, but it involves really understanding nuance and how to present oneself, and how to amplify one's strengths, and how to build coalitions, move one's agenda through influence without direct authority. And that's what the new structure, the new organizational structure looks like. So let's talk about, once we're assuming our MBAs have a resilient mindset, now let's talk about what happens when they have a setback. So they didn't get the job after going second round interviews, or they don't have any callbacks and they've submitted their resumes to 20 different companies. So one thing we talk about and we have to do first is talk about hope, and let them know that there are opportunities on the horizon, and indeed there are, and convey to them that they have agency, that they can influence their career trajectory. Then we move through 4 strategies to mobilize so that they can acknowledge how they feel about this setback, and mobilize so that they can have agency over their outcome. And then we help them stay on track and build a resilient culture around them that helps them with succeeding. So I alluded to these. These are coping strategies for moving through a setback. And it begins with acknowledging feelings. And this is something we do not do very well in business schools. We talk about solving problems. We don't talk about how we feel. But in order to move forward, you need to talk about how you feel. Acknowledge that you've had a setback. Acknowledge that you're scared, disappointed, angry. You might be angry. You could be angry at the recruiter. You could be angry at career management. All of these things can happen. And to acknowledge how you feel. And then we move to reframing the thinking around this, which I'll get into in a moment. And actually, let me take each step at a time, and then we look at mobilizing, and then we move to connecting. So I'll start talking about acknowledging feelings. Yeah.
Just a quick question on acknowledging feelings. I think people will recognize that. Does it matter who you talk to? Is it better to talk to a coach or a friend, or I don't know? Is there a best kind of person to talk to?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
As long as you acknowledge that you feel you have a feeling around this, that is the first step. That it is scary or angry or disappointing or whatever. That's the first step. And okay, so let's start with, acknowledging feelings. The student didn't get any interviews, and we talked about how the student felt at the time. Hey, I feel really disappointed. I don't even feel like trying. That's an important statement made by the MBA. I don't feel like trying. It sounds like learned helplessness, a concept from Martin Seligman brought about, where a student feels like there's nothing they can do to make a difference. So we need to make sure when we're talking to them, and if we understand that they're feeling this way, that they do have agency. In this case, the individual feels like, I don't have what it takes, maybe I should switch fields, and we're suggesting, let's hold on, let's look at the job, or let's look at that particular company. Is that, and unpack it a little bit. And so it's very helpful if they come to us and discuss this situation with us. It's okay to talk to someone else about how they feel, but come to us and move to this next step. Yeah.
So looking at these reactions, which they sound very authentic, but the thing that strikes me is people go from this single disappointment to, actually, I need to completely switch career. I need to change plans, 100 90 degrees. How common is that kind of, I guess it's an overreaction. Is that your experience when you talk to students who are having these disappointments?
Yeah, very much so. Not all, but I would say, yeah, we have individuals making drastic decisions based on one rejection, and so it's really important that they are able to sit with someone and unpack it, or not do anything rash, and think about, maybe I should go for a run, or maybe I should get out in nature and get some perspective. And that's what we suggest all of our students do when they've had a setback. Have a beer with a friend, something that gives them perspective, and then we move forward.
Very good.
All right, so this individual had been on, like, as I mentioned, like 15 interviews, no offers, so disappointed, so hopeless. And they didn't even try for the last 2 interviews. They thought it'd be a waste of time. And this is a problem. When that starts to happen, we're looking at learned helplessness, and we need to move them to action. On the flip side, sometimes we have individuals who have been on interviews and they don't prepare. And why don't they prepare? Because they're afraid that if they're rejected, then they'll have to take it personally, versus if they could blame it on having not prepared. And so, again, we need to unpack some of the psychology around this. And Carol Dweck is a professor from Stanford who first raised this issue, and she said that perfectionists in particular are more likely to be concerned that when there's a rejection, they take it so personally that they don't prepare at all. And so we need to unpack how they feel about these rejections, and that it's not personal.
Someone said in the pre-event, so just let me throw this at you, because
Sure.
I thought it was somewhat interesting. The idea is a student looking at trying to get into a blue chip company. They're worried about an academic setback which has affected their overall grade. They've got this idea that their whole student transcript has been sort of, forever. They've messed things up forever. And there is, maybe that is it. I don't know. What do you do if people have this very strong sense that they've really done some permanent damage?
Some of this is cultural. I understand in Asia, the grades and the marks and getting to the next level is a big deal. In Western cultures, typically and especially in an MBA program, it's a little bit more nuanced. I mean, you wouldn't be in the program if you weren't smart, and that's recognized. And so it's not as catastrophic as one might think.
There you go. Okay, great.
All right, so our next step in the strategy is to reframe thinking. And we reframe it using the 3 Ps. Not to take it personally. I've referenced this before. Sometimes when people, and interviewing is very personal, they feel like, gee, I don't have what it takes, and they feel really strongly about this being a personal rejection versus, gee, maybe I just didn't get it right this time, and they feel that the rejection is pervasive. Oh, this will affect all aspects of my life. I'll never get married. I'll never have children. Versus, no, it's just one aspect of your life. You did not get a callback for this particular interview. Or is it permanent? I'll never get a job. No use even trying. Versus, no, there's lots of opportunities out there. So we use the 3 Ps a lot in helping dispute what the MBA or what the student is thinking when they don't get a callback with a company, or if they feel they have some other kind of setback.
How easy is it to persuade people that they've gone overboard? They've somehow adopted an over personal, over pervasive sense of their situation?
What we've tried to do well, two things. One is this slide I'm showing here, and that's using self-compassion. And this came out of Kristen Neff's work at UT Austin. We say, think of a time when you've had a setback, when your friend talked to you, and what did you say to the friend? And we have them write that down. And we say, and what was your tone of voice? And typically they'll tell their friend, oh, don't be so hard on yourself. This was a competitive field. It's very difficult. You got as far as, this far. You're probably a silver medalist. You probably almost got it. And they're much kinder. When they think of themselves and they made a mistake, the tone of voice is different, and they're harsher. So my feeling is that when someone catastrophizes or thinks all is lost, we try to employ this exercise on self-compassion.
So is the idea here that you can try and catch yourself? You catch yourself giving yourself this brutal assessment.
Right. And then we say, what would you do if your friend had this problem? And then they're a little softer about it, and they're a little less harsh on themselves. And frankly, if they're that hard on themselves, then they will. It'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy, and so these are life lessons that we're teaching them, not to be so hard, recognizing that, and this is from the leadership development side, our high potentials often were harsh on themselves. It was never good enough, but there's a point where it becomes debilitating, or they don't see the forest for the trees. And so it's very important that they learn exercises in self-compassion so that they're functioning well and can bounce back more quickly.
Very good. Very interesting.
All right. So in this exercise, we were saying compare the difference in the tone of voice and how you treat yourself and how you treat a friend, and think about treating yourself more as a friend, because mistakes happen. It's part of the human condition. We're not all perfect, and things can go wrong, not as we expected.
And can you, how effective is trying this talk on yourself versus having someone else say you really are going overboard? I mean, how close can you get coaching yourself versus having someone to talk to and say to you, you really have gone you've gone too far?
Good question. In sports psychology, they have found they've done the most work on this, and those are like in the minute you're telling yourself, oh, I just kicked it the wrong way, and it's soccer or football for you, right? And so, oh, I've done it. I made a mistake. I missed the goal. If they're in the moment, they need to treat themselves kindly versus beating themselves up throughout minute by minute or play by play, and to move on and forget the past. And same with these kinds of things in interviews or in career setbacks, to move on, learn what you can, be kind to yourself. No one's perfect.
Great.
So here's a good example of an individual who didn't get an interview with Microsoft. They say, oh, I'm so disappointed. I guess I won't apply to jobs in the tech industry, which is hugely, I would say hugely, they're catastrophizing, versus saying, oh, let's look at this. Let's look at the job description. Let's look at what happened and learn from it, and look at and reassess strengths. And I do have a great track record, and I will get the next job. I just didn't understand the specifics of this one.
Now, yeah, I wanted to ask a question about numbers, because you mentioned this earlier, and it's occurred to me, do you you can sort of give people lots of facts and say, typically a student would apply to 20 jobs before getting the outcome you want, getting an offer or something. Is that Is that very rational argument the most powerful way to reframe, or what's
Right.
your experience on the
Well,
way to get these messages
that's
across?
right. Um, I have some literature that tells us that every MBA on average applies to 24 jobs before receiving a offer. And in fact, we had an MBA who was told that after he missed the offer and or didn't get an offer, and he applied to 24 jobs. He marked them off as he applied and got the rejection notice, and on the 24th job he got an offer from Intel. So I would say that probably is about right. And I certainly think that some people get jobs in a shorter amount of time and others apply to more, but on average it's 24.
It's a lot of rejection.
Yeah, it is. And so that's hard. It's really hard. Yeah. So we like to think that if we normalize it and let our students know that they can expect this, and if companies can normalize, yeah, mistakes will happen. And talk more about failure, which is happening more and more, because without failure, you can't have innovation. We can see that it is more of a normalized way of being. So reframe, it wasn't personal. You have to keep going to reach your goal, which is to find a job. And then the next step is mobilizing toward goal setting. And you can look at short-term goals like, how am I going to get through this day? I feel terrible I didn't get an offer, to more longer-term goals and regrouping. So one method we use is the GROW method of setting goals. And some of you out listening may be familiar with the GROW method. And it begins with setting a goal and then assessing, is this a realistic goal? Is this realistic given the current economic realities, or given my skill set, or given what they're looking for in the job? And then looking at options. Let's say you see a gap between what you are bringing to the table and what they are looking for in the role. How can you figure out a way to get to your goal without necessarily it being a linear, direct climb up the ladder? So that's why we're showing a rock climbing wall here, because sometimes it's zigging this way and zigging that way to move your way forward. And one example I have of that was a student who came to us, and he was from, his family business was fly fishing, and that was basically his background. And he had applied to a number of jobs. He was starting to get discouraged, and I said, look, you need to understand profit and loss. You need to understand a business. We happened to have a fly fishing manufacturer. They made the flies, they made the poles, they made all the equipment for fly fishing in the area. He interned there. He learned profit and loss. He learned business. He learned how to launch a product, and then he got his next job at Amazon the next year. So it's zigzagging. Yeah.
So looking at the word reality here, what size of goal works in your experience best to motivate people? We're always told to have ambitious goals, but in this context, should it be a big goal or a small goal that people work towards?
It's a good question. It's great to have goals to work toward, but it's great to be able to break them apart into smaller pieces that you can work toward as well, versus a large, massive goal. Because I've had students come to me and they said, I know where I want to be, I just don't know how to get there. And so that didn't mean that they didn't have goals, but how they got there was really challenging for them. So we had to unpack that and talk about how to get there.
And would you say that when people are discouraged, their ability to think actually of a very big, ambitious goal is kind of reduced?
Yeah, that can happen. Yeah, definitely. When they're discouraged, sometimes they totally reject all of their goals, which we say, no, don't don't do that. But they also some still just struggle with that gap between where they are and where they want to be, and they need some help in figuring out how to close the gap and what skill sets they need. Maybe it's a project, maybe it's work experience, maybe it's an additional class, and to think about what they like, what they don't like, to prototype that to help them reach their goal.
Very good.
Okay, so here we have short-term goals, and those might be, track who you've applied to and read the newsletters or scan the web on jobs that you went, and identify gaps that you might have in your professional development, and figure out ways you can shore up those gaps or those deficiencies so that you're competitive with other candidates who are applying to a role. And then potentially rebrand and rewrite your pitch, and that can be necessary if you've been positioning yourself one way, and you really are saying, or really that's not what the company is looking for. Or maybe your pitch is too broad, like I'm a dynamic problem solver who takes charge. That's way too broad and too generic. So be specific to that specific company and understand what their objectives are and what their challenges are. So it requires a bit of empathy on the part of yourself and curiosity in terms of, gee, I wonder what this company is facing, what its challenges are, and what their goals are going forward. And then longer term goals, you'll prototype and take action. And we ask all of our students to have 3 different sets of goals and prototype those goals so that they are realistic and understand if they're not able to achieve their goal, and maybe they want to be a product manager, what's plan B? A product manager in the specific location, what's plan B? What's plan C?
Okay, and look, if there are any more questions in the chat room, we've had some already, but please do ask. I quickly, just because you mentioned it, what is your opinion, Colette, on the feedback that companies might give to failed candidates?
Right. Okay.
What's the useful? Is it best to be kind of very frank or not when you're letting a candidate down?
That's a very good question. And it's something that every employer and everyone who handles candidates, they feel is nuanced. All right. I know that in a large global consultancy, when they've got a candidate that's advanced to the second round of interviews, it's been all day with this candidate, and to send a rejection in the mail that would say, I'm sorry, we cannot offer you a position at this time. It is a big letdown, and it feels very personal because you've been spending a lot of time with the people in this organization. And so what this consultancy does is that they have a consultant call the candidate, and they say, first, I know this is not the news you want to hear. This is disappointing. So that's acknowledging their feelings or helping them move through the model that we're talking about. And they say, I'm sorry, we cannot offer the role for you. We need to, the competition was very competitive, and you are an outstanding candidate, and you have incredible strengths, and that person might list them. You would never have gotten this far if you had not had these strengths. We suggest that you work on maybe being more succinct in problem solving, or being or more savvy in coming up with solutions, whatever it might be. We suggest you work on that going forward. We'd like to see you back, or we certainly would like to stay in touch, and we'd like to continue our relationship. Like, they might link in with them following the rejection. This is an excellent idea because, frankly, the student that did not get the offer with the consultancy might go on to be a senior vice president at a company, who might be thinking, which consultancy do I want to call to help me with my business problems? And the consultancy that is letting them down a little more, not just letting them down, but is more authentic in their response, is the one they'll pick up the phone and call.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yeah. Okay, so finally, in the model, the fourth thing we'd like or encourage our students to do, or anyone who's had a setback, is to connect. And this is asking someone who's had a setback to do a 180-degree turn. The last thing someone wants to do who's had a setback is to go back out there. And this is true in organizations as well with their early career talent. When they've had a fail and something's gone terribly wrong in the organization that they feel responsible for, they might just hide in their office for the next 2 weeks or 3 weeks. But what is much more healthy and more productive is to go back out and connect. For the student looking for a job, we suggest they maybe link in with 3 people or attend a networking event or write for an informational interview with an alumni. So those are all strategies for getting back out there and talking to people. And once it starts, it snowballs and they're able to move forward. Same with those who are early career talent in organizations. They need to also reach out, say, I'd like to do an after action review. I'd like to unpack what went wrong. I'd like to learn from this. And that will help mobilize that individual going forward and give them confidence to take on another larger project. So we're saying connect, and this is in the context of an MBA who didn't get a offer. Ask for informational interviews, link in, attend networking events, request introductions, to just move forward and reach out.
Well, this may be a tricky question, but what would be the who would you, if you're dealing with a young employee who has had a setback, who would they connect with? Because they possibly are not going to want to advertise that there's been a problem.
Oh, very good point. That's right. It's embarrassing and they're ashamed. They feel terrible about it and they wouldn't want to advertise. You're absolutely right. But it's important for them to unpack what went wrong and to learn from that and to demonstrate that they're learning from that. And so I would certainly suggest that people on their team to have individual sessions with them and with their boss to talk about these were the assumptions going in. This is the information we had at hand. These are the decisions we made. This is why I think this was the wrong decision, or this is where we took the wrong turn, and to unpack it and to understand how it would be preventable going forward, which is much more higher degree of emotional maturity and ability to self-regulate versus either blaming themselves or blaming it on others.
I mean, that's actually, if people do what you just described, that's actually impressive, isn't it? I mean, that shows impressive. Yeah.
It is.
Okay, quick question from the chat room. When we we're interviewing, did we cover this? How can we assess the resilience factor?
Right. It's situational questions and understanding what was going on in their mind at the time. Someone could give you someone could tell you some terrible things that have happened in their lives, but that's not exactly where we're going. And that doesn't mean that they're resilient either. What we're looking for is challenging situations. Tell me about the most challenging decision you've had to face. What were your marching orders going in? What were you intending to do? How were you able to accomplish that? And what were the difficulties? And then what did you do then? That kind of thing.
Is there one particular thing that when you say to someone you had a challenging situation, maybe things didn't go right, how did you deal with it? Is there one thing that you would listen out for and think, now that sounds like someone who's resilient?
I see. Yeah, the fact that they might say, there were learnings that they can talk about and vocalize. The fact that they tried again, that they were, I felt like I was waking up and running into a brick wall, and I woke up the next day and did it again and again, and understanding also the thinking process that went on behind that, because it felt like they weren't getting headway, but they kept trying. But the thinking process was, I need to influence certain people, my peers, my subordinates, or people outside my silo to make this happen. And that's a lot of work. That's really difficult.
Great. Now, Colette, I'm going to let you just finish the presentation now, just to keep a few minutes at the end for questions and a closing statement.
Thank you. All right. So when you're working toward a goal, it's helpful to just keep track of where you are and where you're headed, and give yourself small successes along the way. So we recommend that all of our students do this, and we'd recommend that anyone who is working on a big problem do this as well. Also, when things become difficult, the research is telling us that it's really helpful to keep a journal, or to record gratitude and what you're thankful for. There's some work out of Austin with James Pennebaker. He looked at two different groups. One group, and both lost their jobs. The control group did not write in a journal. The non-control group did, and those that wrote in a journal and wrote what they were grateful for got a job sooner. So that's all ways to help you stay on track. So to recap the framework we're talking about, to build resilience, you need to have a mindset shift from, oh, things are going to be easy here on in, I'm all set, to, oh no, setbacks happen, mistakes happen, and to normalize that, and to have a culture that normalizes this, that, failures happen. And then to have hope and agency, hope that, yeah, there are opportunities around the horizon, or an agency that, yeah, I can control this. I can affect change here, and I can alter the course of my career trajectory. We have 4 strategies for moving forward if you have a setback, and then we suggest that you stay on track. So now this leads to maybe gathering some of the collective wisdom of the group listening in. We'd love for you to think of an example when you or had a setback, or one of your employees, and also I'd be interested, since we are working, or this is being broadcast in Asia, I'd be really interested in hearing whether you hear cultural components to this, and then to understand what are the best practices that have worked from your standpoint.
Okay, so please type. We would love to hear from anyone on the call. Let me go, in fact, to a few questions in case people need a bit of time to think. And here is a question, Colette. How do we help students realize some of their life experiences, which may not automatically appear like a relevant resilience experience for a professional role, are actually relevant? How do we dig up these resilience stories that people may have?
That's a great question. Yeah, because there are some people who are so humble out there. You think, oh my God, you went through that, and it's like, oh, what, this is what I expect, and they just seem super humble about the whole thing. But I think it's important to be able to impress upon them that organizations are looking for resiliency, and to think about times when they've encountered a big setback, or when they've felt like they've failed, or when they felt like they basically had to bounce back from something, and how did they do it, and what was it about them that enabled them to do it. And that way we can tease out some of their strengths as well as their capabilities.
Very good. Okay, here's a question that's come in. What are your thoughts about future-proofing one's career versus developing career resilience?
Future-proofing. Ooh, I wish I understood that a little bit better.
Well, let me ask that in another way.
Yeah.
Can you sort of, do you have to become resilient, or can you do stuff to your career to avoid bad stuff happening in the first place?
Yeah. I feel strongly that having a resilient mindset and knowing that, oh, things can go wrong, mistakes can be made, things can happen that are outside my control, restructurings can happen. That's an important mindset to have, so that you're prepared and that you have a plan B and maybe a plan C of what kind of direction you might go in. At the same time, future proofing involves having skill sets that are needed in the marketplace. And so, I mean, I could list off the skill sets needed in the marketplace. Often include things like data analytics, or a knowledge of certain industries or finance. Those kinds of things are really important to also keep in mind, that you're current and that you understand what's going on in the industry you want to be in.
Okay, now we've got time for maybe 2 more questions. I will give precedence to here we go. Yes. I think there's a cultural component to accepting and sharing failures. Expectations in the Asian regions of oneself and others are extremely high. Social status is critical. Your salary is critical. How does one? Is it just not true that in some cultures there is less failure tolerance, and the stakes are in higher? Just people are in America. I know people, bankruptcy is a badge of pride. I tried and it didn't work. But what do you do when there's additional stakes, additional weight on you?
And my understanding, especially in Asian cultures, there's a family component too. So when you fail, you're failing to your family, and we've seen this in our program. We've had students from overseas, and their parents are on their way to graduation. They didn't have a job yet, and this is the stakes were much higher. It's harder, and I've seen this before. And at the same time, it would behoove the parents, if you will, to not do a gap analysis on their children, like you can do, you got this, and you need to work on this gap. It would be better if they looked at their child's strengths, or the strengths, and leverage those strengths. And we're doing a lot of work in this area at Foster right now, and so are a number of different companies. They're using Strength Finders as an assessment, and a number of other assessments like VIA Signature Strengths, to really so to help individuals understand their strengths, have some self-awareness around that, and by leveraging those strengths, they can overcome challenges and difficulties.
Okay, we're very nearly out of time. Maybe Gemma, we could have you back to close out the call and talk about possible next steps.
Thank you very much to Colette and Neil for hosting our webinar today on career resilience. I think I think it has a lot of uses for those on the call, particularly not just from an employer perspective, but certainly from our network in the careers sector as well, and certainly in this region, from my limited experience, there is a lot of pressure on young people, before they even start their tertiary education, and then continues on in their career. I had a driver the other day tell me it was actually harder for a Singaporean to ask you how you are, or answer to the question of how you are, as opposed to asking what someone's salary is, or what position or title you hold in an organisation. So it really is a challenge in this region in particular, that I think we should be looking at in a lot more structured way, such as the framework that you went through today, Colette. So thank you to Neil, and thank you to Colette for joining us today. I know, Colette, it's Thanksgiving for you tomorrow, so happy Thanksgiving. And Neil, you're very welcome to either have another coffee or go back to sleep. Thank you very much to everyone on the session today. Just to wrap up, I just want to let everyone know if you'd like to become a member of SEAAGE, please reach out to us at SEAAGE. We do have annual and memberships that provide exclusive access to resources and networks. And in terms of our upcoming events, we have our Christmas function on the 5th of December. Information is about to go out about that. And we also have confirmed our conference dates for next year, and Wednesday evening, the network evening, like we had this year, and then the full day conference on the 4th of April. And it will be in Singapore. The venue is to be confirmed, but we hope that everyone can join us. And thank you again, Colette and Neil, and for everyone attending the call today.
It's a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank
Pleasure.
You.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye. Thank
Bye-bye.
you.